When Sarah Mitchell offered water and shelter to a stranded drilling crew during Nevada's worst drought in history, she never imagined it would lead to discovering a forgotten gold mine beneath her dying ranch. A mine that had been lost for 150 years and contained one of North America's richest gold deposits worth $340 million, transforming her from a bankrupt single mother about to lose her family's four-generation legacy into one of the wealthiest landowners in the American West. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know what state you're watching from in the comments, and if this story amazes you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another mind-blowing story about a janitor who discovered a hidden room that changed everything. At 37 years old, Sarah Mitchell was staring at the impossible mathematics of survival as she sat in her dusty kitchen on a scorching August morning in 2024, surrounded by final notices from the bank, veterinary bills she couldn't afford, and a well inspection report that had just delivered the death sentence to everything her family had built over 4 generations in the remote hills of Nye County, Nevada. The certified letter from First National Bank of Nevada lay open beside her coffee cup like a financial death warrant, its cold corporate language reducing 127 years of Mitchell family ranching history to a series of missed mortgage payments and legal procedures. Notice of foreclosure proceedings, the header read in bold red letters, followed by the devastating mathematics of generational failure: $127,000 in accumulated mortgage debt, $34,000 in property taxes over the past 18 months, and exactly 45 days to somehow produce money that Sarah knew she didn't have and couldn't possibly raise in time to save the 2,400-acre ranch that had been in her family since 1897. The ranch house they had called home for over a century sat like a weathered monument to American resilience in a valley that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dreams. Built from local stone and pine timber by Sarah's great-great-grandfather in 1899, the house had sheltered 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers who had believed that hard work and determination could overcome any challenge that the Nevada desert might present. Its thick walls had protected families through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, multiple droughts, and economic downturns that had destroyed neighboring ranches throughout the 20th century. But those thick stone walls couldn't protect Sarah from the convergence of financial and environmental disasters that were now threatening to end her family's 127-year presence on land that had sustained them through every previous crisis. The mortgage that was strangling her family's future had been necessary 5 years earlier, when equipment failures and veterinary emergencies had consumed their savings, forcing Sarah to leverage their land against loans that had seemed manageable. When cattle prices were higher and rainfall was more predictable, Sarah's monthly income from her job managing the Tonopah livestock feed store had dropped from $3,400 during the prosperous years to barely $2,100 during the current economic downturn that was affecting rural businesses throughout central Nevada. The feed store, which served ranchers across a 200-mile radius, had seen its customer base shrink as drought and economic pressures forced neighboring ranching families to sell their cattle and abandon operations that had sustained their communities for generations. Meanwhile, Sarah's fixed expenses continued requiring $4,800 per month, regardless of whether the rural Nevada economy could support a sustainable ranching operation. The mortgage payment alone consumed $2,100 monthly. Property taxes demanded another $1,900 quarterly, and the basic costs of maintaining equipment, feeding their remaining cattle, keeping utilities connected, and providing for her 14-year-old daughter Emma's needs created a monthly budget shortfall that had been steadily consuming their ability to maintain their rural lifestyle. But the foreclosure crisis was only the beginning of Sarah's impossible situation. 3 days earlier, County Water Inspector Jake Morrison had delivered news that was even more devastating than the bank's ultimatum. Their primary well, which had provided water for the Mitchell Ranch since 1923, had finally succumbed to the worst drought in Nevada's recorded history and was now producing less than 2 gallons per hour, insufficient to sustain human habitation, let alone the 43 head of cattle that represented the family's only remaining source of income. Sarah, Jake had explained as he packed up his testing equipment beside the failing well that sat 150 yards behind their house. This well has been dropping for 2 years, but now it's hit bedrock. With this drought, the water table has dropped below what your pump can reach. The aquifer that supplied your family for over a century is essentially dry at this depth. Jake Morrison had been inspecting wells throughout Nye County for 15 years, and he had never seen conditions as severe as what was affecting central Nevada during the summer of 2024. The drought that was killing the Mitchell family's well was part of a larger environmental catastrophe that was transforming the American West, creating conditions that made traditional ranching increasingly difficult and financially unsustainable for families who had successfully operated agricultural businesses for multiple generations. You're looking at drilling a new well to at least 400 feet, maybe deeper, Jake had continued, his weathered face reflecting the sympathy he felt for families facing impossible choices throughout his inspection territory. In this terrain, with the equipment access challenges and the depth requirements, that's going to cost you somewhere between $45,000 and $65,000, assuming we can even find water at that depth. And given the regional aquifer depletion, there's no guarantee that a deeper well would be sustainable long-term. The cost of drilling a new well represented more money than Sarah had seen in 5 years of struggling to maintain the ranch while working full-time at the feed store and caring for Emma as a single mother. Even if she could somehow access that much capital, the uncertainty about long-term water availability made it a gamble that could consume their remaining resources without solving their fundamental problem. The well crisis had been building gradually over the past 3 years, as drought conditions had intensified throughout the region. Sarah had watched their water pressure decrease month by month, forcing her to implement increasingly strict conservation measures that affected every aspect of their daily lives. Showers were limited to 3 minutes, laundry was done only when absolutely necessary, and the vegetable garden that had supplemented their food budget for decades had been abandoned to preserve water for drinking and essential household needs. The 43 head of cattle that remained from their once prosperous herd of 200 were consuming the majority of their available water, crowding around their single stock tank during the brutal afternoon heat when temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah had been forced to sell 157 cattle over the past 2 years as feed costs increased and water availability decreased, receiving prices that barely covered the transportation costs to get the animals to market during the worst drought conditions. In recent memory, Emma, who had been born on the ranch and had never known any other home, was starting her freshman year at Tonopah High School in 2 weeks, completely unaware that her mother was calculating whether they would still be living on the ranch when the school year ended in June. The 14-year-old had inherited her great-great-great-grandfather's love for the harsh beauty of the Nevada landscape, spending her afternoons exploring the rocky hills and abandoned mining claims that dotted their 2,400-acre property. The teenager had developed an impressive knowledge of local geology and mining history through her independent explorations, collecting rock samples and researching the various mining operations that had operated in their area during Nevada's boom periods of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Emma's bedroom was filled with specimens of quartz, pyrite, and other minerals. She had discovered during her wanderings, along with books about geology and mining engineering, that she checked out from the Tonopah Library during their weekly trips to town. "Mom, did you know that there were over 40 different mining claims filed on our property between 1889 and 1923? Emma had told Sarah the previous month while showing her a hand-drawn map she had created by researching historical records at the county courthouse. Most of them were abandoned within 5 years because the miners couldn't find enough gold or silver to justify the cost of extraction. But some of the claims showed promising mineral deposits that were never fully explored. Sarah had listened to Emma's geological enthusiasm with the distracted attention of a mother who was focused on immediate survival rather than historical curiosities. But she had been impressed by her daughter's research skills and her genuine passion for understanding the land that had shaped their family's identity for over a century. Emma's interest in mining history represented a connection to their property that went beyond the ranching operations that had sustained previous generations of Mitchell families. The ranch itself sat in a valley surrounded by hills that had been picked over by generations of prospectors during Nevada's various mining booms, leaving behind a landscape dotted with abandoned claims, rusted equipment, and the stone foundations of buildings that had housed the dreams of men who had believed they could extract fortunes from the unforgiving desert. Most of the mining activity in their area had ended by the 1940s, when the easy-to-find deposits had been exhausted and the cost of deeper mining had exceeded the value of whatever gold or silver might remain in the hills. Sarah's great-great-grandfather, Thomas Mitchell, had chosen the location for their ranch specifically because it was surrounded by worthless mining claims that nobody wanted, allowing him to acquire 2,400 acres at prices that were affordable for a rancher who was more interested in grass and water than in dreams of striking it rich through mining. Thomas Mitchell had been a practical man who understood that steady income from cattle was more reliable than the boom and bust cycles that had destroyed so many families who had gambled everything on finding precious metals in the Nevada desert. Chico, original homestead filing from 1897, had described the land as suitable for grazing purposes, with adequate water sources and minimal mineral value. A description that had proven accurate for 127 years of successful ranching operations. Thomas Mitchell had built his ranch house over a natural spring that had provided reliable water through multiple drought cycles, and he had established grazing patterns that had sustained cattle operations through various economic and environmental challenges. But practicality and hard work hadn't been enough to protect the Mitchell family from the convergence of economic and environmental forces that were now threatening to end their 127-year presence on land that had sustained 4 generations of ranchers who had believed that determination and perseverance could overcome any challenge that the desert might present. The drought that was killing their well was part of a larger pattern of climate change that was transforming the American West, creating conditions that made traditional ranching increasingly difficult and financially unsustainable. Sarah had watched their pastures turn brown and brittle, their cattle pond shrink to a muddy puddle that was barely sufficient for their reduced herd, and their neighbors abandon ranching operations that had been profitable for decades, but could no longer generate sufficient income to justify the increasing costs and decreasing reliability of desert agriculture. The Hendersons, who had operated a successful cattle ranch 15 miles to the south, had sold their property to a solar energy company in March after their well had failed completely. The Rodriguezes, whose family had ranched in the area since the 1920s, had liquidated their entire herd in June and were now working in Las Vegas, while their ranch house sat empty, waiting for a buyer who might never appear in a market where Water scarcity was making agricultural properties increasingly difficult to sell. Emma's father, David Chen, had left them 5 years earlier, when the financial pressures of maintaining the ranch had created stress that their marriage couldn't survive. David, who had been a Las Vegas police officer when he married Sarah 12 years earlier, had never fully adapted to the isolation and uncertainty of ranch life. And when the drought had begun affecting their income and their relationship, he had chosen to return to city life rather than continue fighting a battle that he believed was impossible to win. The divorce had been amicable but financially devastating, leaving Sarah with full responsibility for the ranch, the mortgage, and Emma's upbringing, while David provided modest child support payments of $800 monthly that covered barely half of Emma's basic expenses. The child support helped with school supplies, clothing, and medical expenses, but it was insufficient to address the larger financial challenges of maintaining a ranch operation that was becoming increasingly expensive and decreasingly profitable. Sarah had managed to keep the ranch operating for 5 years as a single mother, working full-time at the feed store while maintaining their cattle operation, managing Emma's education and activities, and handling the endless maintenance requirements of ranch life in an environment where equipment failures and weather-related challenges created constant demands on her time, energy, and financial resources. The isolation of rural Nevada life had been both a blessing and a challenge for Sarah, who had grown up in the area but had spent several years living in Reno before, returning to take over the family ranch when her parents had retired to Arizona. Rural living required skills and self-reliance that urban environments never demanded, from repairing water pumps and maintaining fencing to managing cattle health and navigating the complex regulations that governed agricultural operations. When their tractor had broken down during the previous spring's hay-cutting season, Sarah had learned to rebuild the transmission herself by watching YouTube videos and ordering parts online, because calling a professional mechanic would have cost $2,800 that she couldn't afford. When Emma had gotten pneumonia during the previous winter, the nearest pediatric urgent care had been 67 miles away in Reno, and the visit had cost $340 that Sarah had been forced to put on a credit card that she was still paying off at 24.9% annual interest. But rural Nevada had also given them something that city life never could: independence, natural beauty, and a sense of connection to the land that had shaped their family's identity for over a century. Emma had grown up with freedoms and responsibilities that were impossible in urban environments, learning to ride horses before she could drive a car, understanding animal husbandry and agricultural cycles, and developing a deep appreciation for the harsh magnificence of the high desert landscape. The nearest neighbors, Bill and Maria Santos, were a retired couple who had moved to Nevada from California 15 years earlier, seeking the same rural lifestyle that had attracted previous generations of families to the area. Bill had worked as a mining engineer before his retirement, and he had occasionally shared his knowledge of local geology with Emma, encouraging her interest in mineralogy and teaching her to identify different types of rock formations throughout their area. "Your property sits on some interesting geological formations," Bill had told Sarah during a conversation the previous year when he had noticed Emma's rock collection. The mineral surveys from the early 1900s showed promising indicators throughout this valley, but most of the mining operations lacked the technology and capital to do deep exploration. There could be deposits down there that were never discovered. At the time, Sarah had thanked Bill for his information while focusing on more immediate concerns about cattle prices and equipment maintenance. But his comments had planted seeds of curiosity that Emma had pursued through her independent research into local mining history. The teenager had spent hours at the county courthouse researching historical claims and mineral surveys, developing knowledge that impressed even Bill Santos with its depth and accuracy. the financial crisis that now threatened to destroy their Nevada sanctuary had begun 6 months earlier, when a combination of equipment failures, veterinary emergencies, and declining cattle prices had consumed their savings and forced them into the spiral of debt that was now threatening their housing security. A $12,000 veterinary bill for treating a bacterial infection that had affected 15 head of cattle had eliminated their emergency fund, while the failure of their hay baler during the crucial cutting season had forced them to hire custom operators. At costs that exceeded their hay sales revenue, the mortgage that was now strangling their future had originally been secured against their land to cover these emergency expenses, with monthly payments that had seemed manageable when cattle prices were higher and operating costs were lower. But the combination of drought, market volatility, and increasing input costs had created a financial situation where their ranch operation was generating insufficient revenue to cover both operating expenses and debt service. Sarah had exhausted every resource available to single mothers and rural families in Nevada, applying for emergency assistance programs through the State Department of Agriculture, disaster relief programs through FEMA, and agricultural support programs through the USDA. Most programs had waiting lists of 6 months or longer, required documentation that was difficult for small-scale operations to provide, or offered amounts so small that they barely covered a week's worth of expenses while doing nothing to address the underlying crisis. The Nevada Agricultural Assistance Program had provided Sarah with a one-time grant of $2,100 that had covered feed costs for 1 month, but the program was limited to once-per-year assistance and couldn't address her water crisis or mortgage obligations. The Nye County Emergency Services Department had placed her on a waiting list for emergency housing assistance that currently had 234 applicants ahead of her, with an estimated wait time of 8 months for families that weren't facing immediate homelessness. Sarah had also attempted to address her crisis by seeking additional employment, but the combination of her full-time schedule at the feed store, her responsibilities for ranch maintenance and cattle care, and her obligations as Emma's primary caregiver had made it nearly impossible to find supplementary income sources that were compatible with her current situation. The few available jobs in rural Nevada were either too far from their ranch to be practical or offered hourly wages that were insufficient to justify the additional childcare and transportation costs that would be required. The prospect of losing in their Nevada ranch and being forced to move to an urban environment where Emma would lose her connection to the land and lifestyle that had shaped her identity was creating anxiety symptoms in both Sarah and Emma that were affecting their sleep, their appetites, and their ability to function normally in their daily routines. Emma had begun having nightmares about moving to Las Vegas to live near her father, often waking up at 2 a.m. asking whether they were going to lose the ranch and whether she would have to leave her horses and her geological collection behind. Sarah had developed stress-related headaches that made it difficult to concentrate during her shifts at the feed store, creating a cycle of decreased job performance that threatened to make her employment situation even more precarious. The psychological impact of chronic financial stress was also affecting Emma's academic performance and social development, as the teenager struggled to concentrate on schoolwork while worrying about her family's stability and her uncertain future. The ranch that had been Emma's playground and classroom for 14 years represented everything that was at stake in their current crisis. The 2,400 acres of high desert landscape contained not only their home and their livelihood, but also the horses that Emma had raised from foals, the geological specimens she had collected during years of exploration, and the family cemetery, where 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers were buried beneath headstones that told the story of American persistence and determination. Emma's horse, a quarter-horse mare named Copper, whom she had trained from a yearling, represented the kind of relationship between human and animal that was only possible in rural environments where children grew up with responsibilities and freedoms that urban life couldn't provide. Emma had learned horsemanship, animal care, and the subtle communication skills that develop between riders and their mounts through years of daily interaction that had shaped her character and confidence in ways that would be impossible to replicate in any other environment. The teenager had also developed practical skills through ranch life that were preparing her for adult responsibilities in ways that conventional education couldn't match. Emma could repair fencing, operate farm equipment, manage livestock health, and navigate the financial complexities of agricultural operations with competence that impressed adults who had spent their careers in rural industries. But all of these advantages and opportunities would be lost if Sarah couldn't solve their water crisis and financial obligations within the next 45 days. The mathematics of their situation seemed to offer no realistic solutions that could address both their immediate foreclosure threat and their fundamental water scarcity problem, creating a situation where any action that solved one problem would likely make the other problem worse. As Sarah sat at her kitchen table on this scorching August morning, listening to the futile clicking of their well pump as it tried to draw water from an increasingly empty aquifer, she was calculating whether selling their remaining cattle might generate enough cash to fund the drilling of a new well, or whether losing their water source had already made the ranch unsalvageable, regardless of how much money she might be able to raise. The impossible mathematics of their situation had consumed Sarah's thoughts for weeks as she tried to identify any possible combination of actions that could prevent the foreclosure while somehow addressing their water crisis. Even if she could sell all 43 head of cattle at current market prices, she might raise $65,000 to $75,000, which would be enough to drill a new well, but would eliminate their source of income, making it impossible to continue making mortgage payments on a ranch that would no longer be generating revenue. But Sarah Mitchell had no idea that within hours, a stranger's emergency would set in motion a discovery that would transform her desperate situation into an opportunity that exceeded her most optimistic dreams, revealing that the worthless mining claims surrounding her family's ranch contained treasures that would attract the attention of geological experts from around the world and provide the financial security that had seemed impossible for a single mother trying to preserve her family's legacy in the unforgiving landscape of the Nevada desert. The Mitchell family's presence in central Nevada began with a journey of desperation remarkably similar to Sarah's current crisis, when her great-great-grandfather Thomas Mitchell arrived in the territory in 1897 with nothing but determination, $73 in gold coins, and a pregnant wife who was counting on him to build a future from the harsh landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction from the newly established railroad stop at Tonopah. Thomas Mitchell had been a tenant farmer in Ohio when a combination of crop failures, predatory lending practices, and the economic panic of 1893 had destroyed his ability to continue working land that belonged to someone else while never accumulating enough capital to purchase property of his own. At 28 years old, with his wife Margaret expecting their first child and creditors threatening to seize their few possessions, Thomas had made the desperate decision to sell everything they owned and travel west to Nevada, where the Homestead Act promised 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to live on it, improve it, and prove their commitment to building a permanent settlement. The land that Thomas Mitchell claimed under the Homestead Act in March of 1897 was considered virtually worthless by government surveyors and railroad officials who had classified It is suitable only for mineral exploration with limited agricultural potential due to insufficient rainfall and challenging terrain. The 160-acre homestead sat in a remote valley 60 miles northeast of the growing mining town of Tonopah, surrounded by rocky hills that showed evidence of mineral deposits, but had proven too difficult and expensive for the individual prospectors, who had filed claims throughout the area during the 1880s and early 1890s. What made Thomas Mitchell's homestead different from the abandoned mining claims that surrounded it was his focus on finding water rather than gold. While other settlers had been drawn to the area by dreams of striking it rich through mining, Thomas understood that sustainable agriculture required reliable water sources, and he had spent weeks exploring the valley before filing his claim, looking for signs of underground springs and seasonal water patterns that would support livestock and basic farming operations. The natural spring that Thomas discovered 200 yards behind the location where he planned to build his house had been used by Shoshone hunting parties for generations, marked by petroglyphs carved into nearby boulders that showed the cultural significance of this reliable water source in an otherwise arid landscape. The spring produced approximately 12 gallons per hour during dry seasons and up to 30 gallons per hour during wet years, providing sufficient water for a small cattle operation while requiring careful conservation and management to sustain year-round agricultural activities. Thomas Mitchell's first winter in Nevada nearly killed his entire family. Margaret gave birth to their son William in a one-room cabin that Thomas had constructed from local stone and pine timber hauled from mountains 15 miles to the west, with no medical assistance and no neighbors within a day's ride. The winter of 1897 to 98 brought temperatures that dropped to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time, testing the survival skills of a man who had never experienced the extreme conditions that characterized high desert winters. Food. Supplies that Thomas had calculated would last until spring were exhausted by February, forcing him to hunt jackrabbits and attempt to preserve meat in an environment where his Ohio farming experience provided little guidance for managing food, storage without proper root cellars, or refrigeration. Margaret developed pneumonia in January that nearly took her life, and infant William survived only because Margaret's determination to nurse him never wavered despite her illness and the inadequate heating provided by their small wood stove. But Thomas Mitchell's gamble on Nevada homesteading proved successful when spring arrived, and revealed that his property contained not only reliable water, but also natural pasture grasses that could support cattle operations if managed carefully. The valley's elevation and drainage patterns created microclimates that supported vegetation during seasons when surrounding areas remained barren, and Thomas realized that his 160 acres could be expanded through additional claims and purchases that would create a viable ranching operation. By 1899, Thomas had acquired 480 acres through a combination of additional homestead filings, purchases from discouraged miners who were abandoning their claims, and agreements with neighbors who were willing to sell land that they had never intended to farm. The expanded property included several seasonal water sources and enough grazing area to support a herd of 50 cattle, representing the beginning of a ranching operation that would sustain 4 generations of Mitchell families. The house that Thomas built in 1899 to replace their original survival cabin became the foundation of the structure where Sarah and Emma now lived over 125 years later. Constructed from local sandstone quarried from hills on their property, with walls 2 feet thick and a design that incorporated passive cooling techniques learned from Hispanic ranchers who had developed building methods suited to desert climates, the house was built to last centuries rather than decades. Thomas Mitchell's ranch prospered during the early 1900s when Nevada's mining booms created markets for beef among the thousands of miners, railroad workers, and support personnel who, flooded into central Nevada, seeking fortunes in gold and silver extraction. The Mitchell Ranch supplied cattle to mining camps throughout the region, taking advantage of premium prices paid by mining companies that needed to feed large workforces in remote locations where transportation costs made food expensive and sometimes unavailable. But Thomas Mitchell's success came from understanding that mining booms were temporary while land ownership was permanent. While neighboring ranchers mortgaged their properties to invest in mining claims and equipment, Thomas focused on expanding his land holdings and improving his cattle operation, believing that steady income from ranching was more reliable than the boom and bust cycles that destroyed families who gambled everything on striking it rich through mineral extraction. The mining activity that surrounded Thomas Mitchell's ranch during the early 1900s was extensive and sophisticated, involving companies that invested millions of dollars in equipment, labor, and infrastructure designed to extract gold and silver from deposits that geological surveys indicated were present throughout the region. The Consolidated Nevada Mining Company operated 3 separate mines within 5 miles of the Mitchell Ranch between 1903 and 1919, employing over 200 workers and producing gold and silver worth approximately $2.3 million during their most productive years. The abandoned mining claims that dotted the Mitchell property represented investments by dozens of individual prospectors and small companies who had identified promising mineral indicators but lacked the capital or technology to pursue deep mining operations that would be necessary to access deposits below the surface level minerals that could be extracted through simple prospecting techniques. Most of the claims had been abandoned by 1920. When declining mineral prices and increasing extraction costs made it uneconomical to continue operations that were producing insufficient returns to justify continued investment. Thomas Mitchell's son William inherited the ranch in 1932 and expanded the operation to 200 acres during the Great Depression, when economic hardship forced neighboring families to sell their properties at prices that made expansion affordable for ranchers who had maintained financial stability through conservative management and diversified income sources. William Mitchell had learned from his father's example that success in Nevada ranching required careful resource management, strategic land acquisition, and the ability to survive economic downturns that destroyed operations that were over-leveraged or dependent on volatile commodity markets. William Mitchell's marriage to Eleanor Santos in 1934 brought additional expertise in desert agriculture and animal husbandry that helped the ranch operation become more sophisticated and profitable. Eleanor's family had operated sheep and cattle ranches in northern Nevada since the 1880s, and she contributed knowledge about breeding programs, pasture management, and marketing strategies that allowed the Mitchell Ranch to compete successfully with larger operations that had access to better transportation and financing. The ranch that William and Eleanor developed during the 1930s and 1940s included not only cattle operations but also hay production, sheep grazing, and limited farming that took advantage of their reliable water sources and the diverse microclimates present throughout their expanded property. Their operation became a model of sustainable desert agriculture that other ranchers studied and copied, demonstrating that careful resource management could create profitable agricultural businesses in environments that many experts considered unsuitable for farming. William and Eleanor's son Robert inherited the ranch in 1963 and continued the family tradition of conservative expansion and resource management that had allowed the Mitchell family to survive economic challenges that had destroyed neighboring operations. Robert Mitchell had served in the Korean War and returned to Nevada with broader perspectives on business management and technology that he applied to modernizing ranch operations while preserving the fundamental principles that had sustained Their family's agricultural success. Robert Mitchell's marriage to Patricia Chen in 1968 brought additional cultural perspectives and business expertise that helped the ranch adapt to changing economic conditions during the 1970s and 1980s. Patricia had grown up in a Chinese-American family that operated restaurants and small businesses in California, and she contributed financial management skills and marketing strategies that allowed the Mitchell Ranch to develop direct sales relationships with restaurants and meat processors that paid premium prices for high-quality beef produced through sustainable ranching practices. The ranch that Robert and Patricia developed during the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s represented the peak of the Mitchell family's agricultural success. With 2,400 acres, supporting 300 head of cattle, extensive hay production, and diversified income sources that included hunting guide services, equipment rental, and consulting services for other ranchers who wanted to implement sustainable desert agriculture practices. Their operation generated sufficient income to support comfortable middle-class lifestyles while building savings and investments that provided financial security for their retirement and inheritance for their children. Sarah Mitchell was born in 1987 as the fourth generation of her family to grow up on the Nevada ranch, learning from childhood the skills and perspectives that shaped her identity as a rancher, a Nevadan, and a woman who understood both the opportunities and challenges of rural agricultural life. Her childhood was spent learning to ride horses, care for cattle, operate farm equipment, and understand the complex relationships between weather, markets, economics, and family survival that characterized ranching in the American West. Sarah's education included not only traditional academic subjects at Tonopah High School, but also practical training in animal husbandry, agricultural economics, equipment maintenance, and resource management that prepared her for eventually assuming responsibility for the family ranch. Her parents encouraged her to attend college and explore career opportunities outside of ranching, but they also ensured that she developed the skills and knowledge that would allow her to continue the family's agricultural legacy if she chose to return to Nevada after pursuing other experiences. Sarah's college years at the University of Nevada, Reno, from 2005 to 2009, provided her with broader perspectives on business, economics, and environmental science that she would later apply to ranch management, but also introduced her to urban lifestyles and career opportunities that made the isolation and challenges of rural ranching seem less appealing than they had during her childhood. Her degree in business administration with a minor in environmental studies prepared her for various career paths while providing knowledge that would be valuable in agricultural management if she decided to return to the family ranch. After graduation, Sarah spent 3 years working for an environmental consulting firm in Reno, conducting impact assessments for mining and development projects throughout Nevada, while living in an urban environment that offered cultural amenities, social opportunities, and career advancement possibilities that were unavailable in rural ranching communities. Her work with the consulting firm provided valuable experience in project management, regulatory compliance, and environmental science that would later prove useful in ranch operations, but also demonstrated the financial advantages and lifestyle benefits of professional careers compared to the uncertainties and challenges of agricultural life. Sarah's decision to return to the family ranch in 2012 was motivated by her parents' desire to retire to Arizona and their need for a family member who could assume responsibility for continuing the agricultural operation that had sustained 4 generations of Mitchell families. At 25 years old, Sarah understood that inheriting the ranch represented both an extraordinary opportunity and a significant responsibility that would shape the rest of her life and determine whether her family's 115-year agricultural legacy would continue into the future. The ranch that Sarah inherited in 2012 was financially stable and operationally successful, generating sufficient income to support comfortable middle-class lifestyles while maintaining the property and equipment necessary for continued agricultural operations. Robert and Patricia Mitchell had managed their resources carefully and had avoided the debt burdens that were destroying neighboring ranches, leaving Sarah with a viable business operation and the knowledge necessary to continue their family's tradition of sustainable desert agriculture. Sarah's marriage to David Chen in 2011 had seemed to promise a partnership that would strengthen the ranch operation through David's urban professional background and his willingness to learn agricultural skills that would complement Sarah's ranching expertise. David's career as a Las Vegas police officer provided stable income and benefits that supplemented the ranch revenue, while his law enforcement experience contributed practical skills in crisis management, equipment maintenance, and community relations that were valuable in rural environments. Emma Mitchell Chen was born in 2010, representing the fifth generation of the Mitchell family to grow up on the Nevada ranch and inherit the cultural legacy of self-reliance, environmental stewardship, and agricultural knowledge that had shaped her family's identity for over a century. Emma's early childhood on the ranch provided her with experiences and perspectives that were becoming increasingly rare in American society as urbanization and technological change eliminated many of the rural communities and agricultural lifestyles that had characterized American culture throughout previous centuries. But the combination of environmental and economic pressures that began affecting central Nevada during the mid-2010s created challenges that previous generations of Mitchell ranchers had never experienced, testing the sustainability of agricultural operations that had survived multiple economic downturns, droughts, and market volatility during the 20th century. Climate change was creating drought conditions that were more severe and prolonged than historical patterns, while economic globalization was creating competitive pressures that made small-scale ranching operations increasingly difficult to maintain and profitably. The drought that began affecting central Nevada in 2018 was different from previous dry periods that the Mitchell Ranch had survived successfully through careful resource management and conservative financial practices. Unlike historical droughts that typically lasted 1 to 3 years before normal precipitation patterns returned, the current drought represented a fundamental shift in regional climate patterns that threatened the long-term viability of agricultural operations that depended on reliable water sources and predictable seasonal weather patterns. Sarah's parents had retired to Arizona in 2015, leaving her with full responsibility for the ranch operation during a period when environmental and economic conditions were making ranching increasingly challenging and financially precarious. The knowledge and experience that Robert and Patricia Mitchell had accumulated during 50 years of successful ranch management were invaluable, but they had never faced the combination of prolonged drought, volatile commodity markets, and increased operating costs that characterized agricultural conditions during the late 2010s and early 2020s. David Chen's departure from the marriage in 2019 eliminated not only emotional support, but also the supplementary income that had helped sustain the ranch operation during difficult periods when cattle sales and agricultural revenue were insufficient to cover operating expenses and family living costs. David's police officer salary had provided approximately $4,200 monthly in stable income that had allowed Sarah to invest ranch profits in property improvements and equipment maintenance rather than using all agricultural revenue for immediate survival needs. The divorce settlement had been structured to minimize financial disruption to the ranch operation, with David retaining no ownership interest in the agricultural property, but accepting responsibility for child support payments. That would help cover Emma's expenses while allowing Sarah to focus ranch revenue on operational needs. However, the loss of David's income created budget pressures that made the ranch more vulnerable to the economic impacts of drought, market volatility, and equipment failures that had always been part of agricultural life, but had been manageable when family income included non-agricultural sources. Sarah's employment at the Tonopah Livestock Feed Store, beginning in 2020, represented a necessary adaptation to changed economic circumstances, providing stable income that supplemented declining ranch revenue while allowing her to maintain residence on the family property and continue cattle operations at a reduced scale. The feed store job utilized Sarah's agricultural knowledge and business experience while providing flexibility that allowed her to manage ranch responsibilities and Emma's needs as a single mother in a rural environment. But the feed store employment, while necessary for financial survival, also represented a fundamental change in the Mitchell family's relationship to their agricultural legacy. For the first time in 123 years, the ranch was not generating sufficient income to support the family that lived on it, requiring outside employment to supplement agricultural revenue and maintain the property that had sustained 4 previous generations through exclusive focus on ranching operations. Emma's childhood on the ranch during the 2010s and early 2020s provided her with many of the same experiences and opportunities that had shaped previous generations of Mitchell children. But in a context of increasing uncertainty about the long-term viability of agricultural life in central Nevada, Emma learned to ride horses, care for livestock, operate farm equipment, and understand the complex relationships between weather, economics, and family survival that characterized ranching. But she also witnessed the stress and uncertainty that were affecting her mother's ability to maintain their agricultural lifestyle. The teenagers' fascination with geology and mining history represented both a connection to the broader history of their property and a potential alternative to the agricultural focus that had characterized previous generations of her family. Emma's research into local mining operations and her collection of mineral specimens reflected genuine intellectual curiosity about the geological processes that had shaped their landscape, but also suggested interest that might lead to career paths outside of traditional ranching if agricultural operations continued to become less economically viable. Emma's discovery that their property had been the site of extensive mining activity during the early 1900s provided historical context that previous generations of Mitchell ranchers had never fully explored, partly because their focus on agricultural success had made mining history seem irrelevant to their practical concerns. About cattle, pasture management and ranch operations, Thomas Mitchell's dismissal of mining as unreliable compared to ranching had shaped family attitudes that emphasized agricultural pursuits while viewing mineral extraction as speculation that was unsuitable for families seeking long-term security and stability. But Emma's research revealed that the mining claims that had been abandoned on Mitchell property during the early 20th century had never been fully explored or exhausted, with most operations ending due to insufficient capital and primitive technology rather than actual depletion of mineral resources. The geological surveys conducted during the 1900s and 1910s had identified promising indicators of gold and silver deposits throughout the area, but the individual prospectors and small companies operating during that period had lacked the equipment and financing necessary to pursue deep mining operations that would access deposits below the surface-level minerals that could be extracted through simple techniques. The convergence of Sarah's desperate financial situation with Emma's historical research and geological knowledge created circumstances that previous generations of Mitchell ranchers had never experienced, combining immediate threats to family survival with new information about potential resources that had remained unexplored for over a century. Sarah's practical focus on immediate problems like mortgage payments and water supply had prevented her from seriously considering Emma's suggestions about the possible value of mineral deposits on their property, but the severity of their current crisis was forcing her to evaluate every possible option for generating income that might save their ranch. The 43 head of cattle that remained from their once prosperous herd represented the last remnant of the Mitchell family's agricultural success, consuming most of their available water while generating insufficient revenue to cover operating expenses and debt obligations. Sarah's calculations about selling the cattle to fund well drilling represented a potential end to 127 years of continuous ranching operations, transforming their property from a working agricultural operation into a rural residence that might or might not be sustainable depending on whether a new well could provide adequate water for basic household needs. But Sarah Mitchell had no idea that Emma's geological research and mineral collecting hobby had provided information that would prove invaluable when emergency circumstances brought professional geological expertise to their property, revealing that the worthless mining claims that had been abandoned by previous generations contained treasures that would exceed the value of everything that 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers had produced through 127 years of agricultural operations. The drought that was threatening to destroy their ranch was about to become the catalyst for discoveries that would validate Emma's research and transform their understanding of their property's value, connecting their family's agricultural legacy to the mining history that previous generations had dismissed as irrelevant to their practical concerns about building sustainable lives in the Nevada desert. The land that Thomas Mitchell had chosen for its water sources and agricultural potential was about to reveal that his decision to locate their ranch in a valley surrounded by abandoned mining claims had positioned his descendants to inherit not only 127 years of agricultural legacy, but also mineral wealth that had remained hidden beneath their feet throughout 4 generations of successful ranching operations that had never required them to look below the surface for the resources necessary to sustain their family's prosperity and security in the challenging environment of central Nevada. It was 2:47 p.m. on that blistering August afternoon when the sound of a struggling diesel engine first penetrated the oppressive silence that had settled over the Mitchell Ranch like a suffocating blanket during the worst heat wave in Nevada's recorded history. Sarah was standing beside their failing well, watching the pathetic trickle of water that represented their family's dwindling lifeline, when she heard what sounded like a heavy truck laboring up the gravel road that connected their property to State Route 6, the engine straining against what appeared to be mechanical problems, compounded by the brutal heat that was making equipment failures a daily occurrence throughout central Nevada. The temperature had reached 118 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-afternoon, creating conditions that were pushing both human endurance and mechanical systems beyond their designed limits. Sarah had been checking their well every few hours, measuring the declining water flow and calculating how many days they might be able to maintain basic household operations before their situation became completely unsustainable. The well pump was cycling on and off every 30 seconds, desperately trying to draw water from an aquifer that was dropping faster than their equipment could adapt to the changing conditions. Emma was in her bedroom, escaping the heat, while researching geological surveys on her laptop computer, working with documents she had downloaded from the Nevada Division of Minerals website that detailed the mining claims and mineral assessments that had been conducted on their property during the early 20th century. The teenager had become increasingly absorbed in her historical research as their family's crisis had intensified, partly as a coping mechanism for dealing with stress she couldn't control, and partly because her analytical mind was searching for any information that might provide alternatives to the impossible situation that was threatening their survival. The engine noise grew louder and more erratic as the vehicle approached their ranch house, accompanied by the distinctive hissing sound of overheating equipment and the grinding noise of mechanical components that were failing under the extreme conditions. Sarah walked toward the front of their property, shading her eyes against the brutal sunlight, and saw a massive drilling truck approaching their gate, steam pouring from its radiator and black smoke emerging from its exhaust stack in patterns that clearly indicated serious mechanical distress. The truck was a Ingersoll Rand T4W water well drilling rig, a piece of specialized equipment worth approximately $400,000 that was designed for deep water well installation in challenging geological conditions. The rig was mounted on a heavy-duty truck chassis and included sophisticated drilling equipment, pumping systems, and safety features that made it capable of drilling wells to depths of 800 feet or more. But the extreme heat and challenging terrain of central Nevada were testing the limits of even professional-grade equipment designed for desert operations. As the drilling truck reached their gate, Sarah could see that it was being operated by 3 men who were clearly experiencing an emergency situation that had forced them to seek help at the first property they could reach along the remote highway that connected small communities throughout central Nevada. The truck's radiator was boiling over, creating clouds of steam that obscured the windshield, while warning lights on the dashboard were indicating multiple system failures that had brought their operation to a complete halt. The driver of the truck was Miguel Rodriguez, a 43-year-old drilling contractor who had been installing water wells throughout Nevada, Arizona, and California for over 20 years, working for families and businesses that needed reliable water sources in desert environments where conventional municipal services were unavailable. Miguel's company, Desert Wells Drilling Services, had built a reputation for solving complex water access problems in challenging geological conditions, but even their experience and professional equipment were being tested by the extreme drought and heat conditions that were affecting the entire southwestern United States. Miguel's crew included Tommy Henderson, a 28-year-old drilling technician who specialized in geological analysis and equipment operation, and Carlos Mendoza, a 35-year-old pump installation specialist whose expertise in water system design and maintenance made him invaluable for projects that required customized solutions for unique geological and technical challenges. The 3 men had been working together for over 5 years, developing the kind of professional partnership and technical expertise that allowed them to tackle drilling projects that other contractors considered too difficult or unprofitable to attempt. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry to bother you," Miguel called out as he climbed down from the truck's cab, his work clothes soaked with sweat and his face showing the strain of dealing with equipment failures in dangerous heat conditions. "We're having serious mechanical problems, and we need help getting our truck cooled down and our equipment stabilized before we can continue to our job site. We were hoping we could get some water for our radiator and maybe some shade where we can work on our engine without risking heat stroke." Sarah looked at the 3 men, recognizing the kind of professional competence and genuine distress that made their request for assistance both legitimate and urgent. Despite her family's own desperate situation, Sarah's instinctive response to people in need reflected the values that had shaped 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers who had survived in harsh environments, partly through mutual assistance and community cooperation that transcended individual family concerns during emergency situations. "Of course," Sarah replied, opening their gate and gesturing toward the shaded area beside their barn where the drilling truck could be positioned out of direct sunlight. "We can definitely help you with water and a place to work on your truck. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is our ranch." Miguel introduced his crew members as they maneuvered their disabled truck into the shade beside the Mitchell barn, explaining that they had been traveling from a completed drilling project in Tonopah to a new job site near Austin when their truck's cooling system had failed due to a combination of extreme heat, challenging terrain, and the additional stress created by hauling heavy drilling equipment across mountain roads during the worst weather conditions any of them had experienced during their careers. "We've been drilling wells throughout Nevada for decades," Miguel explained as he began opening the truck's hood to assess their mechanical problems. "But we've never seen heat like this, and we've never had this many equipment failures in such a short period. Our truck's cooling system was just rebuilt 3 months ago, but these conditions are beyond what any of this equipment was designed to handle." Tommy Henderson was already examining the truck's engine with the systematic approach of someone who understood both the mechanical systems and the environmental factors that were creating their current crisis. "The radiator is completely overheated, the water pump is failing, and we're getting pressure readings that indicate serious problems with the cooling circulation system," Tommy reported to Miguel. "We're going to need at least 2 hours to cool everything down, diagnose the specific problems, and make repairs before we can safely continue traveling." Sarah brought the crew members cold water, wet towels, and access to the shade of their porch while they waited for their equipment to cool sufficiently for them to begin diagnostic work. The 3 men were clearly experienced professionals who understood both the technical aspects of their work and the safety requirements for operating heavy equipment in extreme environmental conditions. But they were also obviously grateful for assistance that could mean the difference between successful equipment repair and potentially dangerous mechanical failures in a remote location. "Mrs. Mitchell," Carlos Mendoza said, as he gratefully accepted the cold water that Sarah provided, "we really appreciate your hospitality. We're not used to asking for help, but this heat is creating conditions that are beyond anything we've planned for, and your assistance could quite literally be saving our lives as well as our equipment." As the drilling crew worked on their truck repairs, Sarah found herself in conversation with Miguel Rodriguez about the water well crisis that was affecting families throughout central Nevada, including her own desperate situation with their failing ranch well. Miguel's expertise in water access problems and his knowledge of regional geological conditions made him an invaluable source of information about options that might be available for addressing their family's water crisis. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said as he examined the pathetic trickle coming from the Mitchell family's well pump, "I can see that you're facing the same kind of water access problems that are affecting everyone in this region. Your well appears to be hitting bedrock at a depth where the aquifer has dropped below your pump's capacity, which is exactly what we're seeing throughout central Nevada." Miguel's preliminary assessment of their water situation confirmed what County Inspector Jake Morrison had told Sarah 3 days earlier, but Miguel's professional expertise allowed him to provide more detailed analysis of their options and the realistic costs associated with different approaches to solving their water access problems. His company's experience with similar situations throughout the region gave him insights into both the technical requirements and the financial realities of water well drilling in challenging geological conditions. "Based on what I can see here," Miguel continued, You're probably looking at drilling to 400 or 500 feet to reach water that would be sustainable during current drought conditions. And in this geological formation, that's going to require specialized equipment and techniques that most drilling contractors don't have the capability to provide. Tommy Henderson, who had been examining the geological features visible throughout the Mitchell property while their truck was cooling down, approached Sarah and Miguel with observations that reflected his professional training in geological analysis and his experience with water well drilling in desert environments throughout the southwestern United States. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy said, "I've been looking at the rock formations and terrain features throughout your property, and I'm seeing some interesting geological indicators that suggest this area has more complex mineral composition than typical ranching properties in central Nevada. The surface geology shows signs of mineral deposits and underground structural features that could affect both water access and other geological characteristics." Tommy's observations about the geological complexity of the Mitchell property reflected the kind of professional analysis that Emma had been attempting through her independent research, but with the advantage of formal training and field experience that allowed him to interpret landscape features and rock formations with greater accuracy and technical sophistication than a 14-year-old amateur geologist could achieve through library research and internet resources. Emma, who had been monitoring the conversation from their porch while remaining respectfully out of the way of the adults' technical discussions, finally couldn't contain her excitement about having professional geological expertise available to evaluate the research and mineral specimens that she had been collecting during her years of exploring their property. The teenager approached the group with obvious enthusiasm about the possibility of having her geological theories evaluated by professionals who had the knowledge and experience to determine whether her research had identified anything significant. "Excuse me," Emma said politely to Tommy Henderson. "I don't want to interrupt your work, but I've been researching the geological history of our property, and I've found some really interesting information about mining claims and mineral deposits that were identified here during the early 1900s. Would you be willing to look at some of the historical surveys and mineral specimens that I've collected?" Tommy's reaction to Emma's request reflected both professional curiosity about geological information and genuine interest in encouraging a young person's enthusiasm for earth sciences. "I'd be very interested in seeing what you found," Tommy replied. "Understanding the historical geological activity in an area can provide valuable insights for water well drilling, and it sounds like you've done some serious research." Emma disappeared into the house and returned with a cardboard box containing her collection of mineral specimens, photocopied historical documents, and hand-drawn maps that represented months of independent research into the geological and mining history of their family's property. Her collection included samples of quartz, pyrite, galena, and other minerals that she had found throughout their 2,400 acres, along with documentation of the mining claims that had been filed and abandoned on their land during the early 20th century. Tommy Henderson's examination of Emma's geological collection revealed both the teenager's genuine enthusiasm for earth sciences and her impressive ability to conduct independent research using resources that were available through libraries, government websites, and historical archives. Emma's mineral specimens were properly catalogued and labeled, her historical research was accurately documented, and her hand-drawn maps showed detailed knowledge of the geological features and mining claim locations throughout their property. "Emma, this is really impressive work," Tommy said as he examined her mineral specimens and historical documentation. "You've identified several minerals that are associated with gold and silver deposits, and your research into historical mining claims shows that this area had significant mineral exploration activity during Nevada's major mining periods." Some of these mineral samples suggest geological formations that could contain valuable deposits. Miguel Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation while continuing work on their truck repairs, approached Emma's geological display with the kind of professional interest that reflected both his technical expertise and his experience with properties throughout Nevada, where mineral deposits and water access issues were interconnected through complex geological relationships. "Emma," Miguel said, "the geological features that you've identified could be very relevant to solving your family's water access problems. Sometimes the same geological formations that contain mineral deposits also contain water sources at depths that aren't accessible through conventional well drilling techniques. Understanding the mineral composition and underground structure of your property could help us develop more effective approaches to finding sustainable water sources." Carlos Mendoza, whose specialization in water system design included knowledge of geological factors that affected well drilling success, examined Emma's research with particular attention to the relationship between historical mining activity and current water access challenges. His experience had shown that properties with complex geological histories often required customized drilling approaches that took into account underground structural features created by previous mining activity and natural mineral formations. "Mrs. Mitchell," Carlos said, "Emma's research suggests that your property has geological complexity that could affect our standard approaches to water well drilling. If we're going to drill a new well for your family, we should probably conduct more detailed geological analysis to understand the underground structures and mineral compositions that could influence where we drill and what techniques we use." Sarah listened to the conversation between her daughter and the drilling professionals with growing amazement at both Emma's knowledge and the implications of what the experts were suggesting about the geological significance of their property. For months, Sarah had been focused on immediate survival concerns, while dismissing Emma's geological interests as interesting hobbies that were irrelevant to their practical problems. But the professional validation of Emma's research was suggesting connections between her daughter's mineral collecting and their family's water crisis that Sarah had never considered. "Are you saying that Emma's geological research could help us find water?" Sarah asked, trying to understand the technical relationships that the drilling experts were describing. "It's possible," Miguel replied. "Understanding the mineral composition and geological structure of your property could help us identify the most promising locations for drilling and the most effective techniques for reaching sustainable water sources. Emma's research provides historical information that could be very valuable for planning a drilling project that has the best chance of success." Tommy Henderson was continuing his examination of Emma's mineral specimens with increasing interest, using a handheld geological testing device to analyze the chemical composition of samples that Emma had collected from various locations throughout their property. His testing was revealing mineral concentrations and chemical signatures that were consistent with geological formations associated with significant precious metal deposits. "Emma," Tommy said, his voice reflecting growing excitement about what his testing was revealing, "some of these mineral samples are showing gold and silver concentrations that are much higher than what we typically see in casual surface collecting. The pyrite and quartz samples from your collection are showing chemical signatures that suggest the presence of precious metal deposits that could be economically significant." Tommy's analysis of Emma's mineral collection was confirming the teenagers' intuitive understanding that their property contained geological features that were different from typical ranching land in central Nevada. The mineral concentrations that Tommy was detecting through professional testing equipment were validating Emma's research into historical mining claims, while suggesting that the worthless mining sites that had been abandoned during the early 1900s might have contained valuable deposits that were never properly explored due to limitations in technology and capital available to individual prospectors. Miguel Rodriguez was becoming increasingly interested in the geological complexity that Emma's research was revealing, recognizing that the mineral deposits and underground structural features could affect both water well drilling and potentially create opportunities for mineral extraction that could address the Mitchell family's financial crisis while also solving their water access problems. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said, "what Emma has discovered suggests that your property might have geological value that goes far beyond typical ranching applications. If there are significant mineral deposits here, that could create opportunities for addressing both your water needs and your financial situation through mineral extraction partnerships with mining companies that have the expertise and capital to evaluate and develop deposits that individual prospectors couldn't access during the early 1900s. Sarah was beginning to understand that Emma's geological research and mineral collecting hobby might represent more than interesting historical information about their family's property. The professional validation that the drilling experts were providing suggested that her 14-year-old daughter had identified geological resources that could potentially solve their financial crisis while also addressing their water access problems through techniques and partnerships that Sarah had never considered possible. Carlos Mendoza was examining the locations where Emma had collected her most promising mineral specimens, using GPS equipment to map the precise coordinates and geological features associated with areas that were showing the highest concentrations of precious metals and other valuable minerals. His mapping was revealing patterns and relationships between geological formations and mineral deposits that suggested systematic underground structures rather than random surface mineralization. "Emma, the locations where you found these high concentration mineral specimens are showing geological patterns that suggest major underground deposits rather than just surface-level mineralization," Carlos explained. "The spatial relationships and mineral compositions that you've documented indicate geological formations that typically contain significant precious metal deposits at depths that weren't accessible to early 20th century mining operations." The drilling crew's analysis of Emma's geological research was revealing that the Mitchell family's property contained mineral resources that had remained unexplored for over a century due to technological limitations that no longer existed. Modern mining techniques and equipment could access deposits at depths and in geological formations that had been impossible for individual prospectors and small mining companies to explore during the early 1900s, when most of the mining claims on their property had been filed and subsequently abandoned. Tommy Henderson was using his professional geological testing equipment to analyze soil samples and rock formations from various locations throughout the Mitchell property, guided by Emma's research and her detailed knowledge of where different mineral specimens had been found during her years of exploration. His systematic analysis was confirming and expanding upon Emma's discoveries, revealing mineral concentrations and geological features that exceeded what any of the drilling professionals had expected to find on what they had assumed was typical ranching property. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy said, his voice reflecting amazement at what his professional analysis was revealing, "Emma's research has led us to geological discoveries that could be extremely significant. We're finding mineral concentrations and geological formations that suggest the presence of major precious metal deposits that could have enormous economic value." The combination of Emma's historical research, her mineral specimen collection, and the drilling crew's professional geological analysis was revealing that the Mitchell family's ranch sat on top of geological resources that could potentially solve their financial crisis and provide long-term economic security that would far exceed anything that ranching operations had ever generated during their family's 127-year agricultural history. Miguel Rodriguez was beginning to understand that their truck breakdown and emergency stop at the Mitchell Ranch had brought them into contact with geological discoveries that were far more significant than typical water well drilling projects. His company's expertise in deep drilling techniques and geological analysis positioned them to provide both immediate assistance with the family's water crisis and potentially long-term partnership opportunities for mineral exploration and extraction that could benefit both his business and the Mitchell family. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about what Emma has discovered and what options might be available for addressing both your immediate water needs and the broader opportunities that these geological discoveries might represent. Our company has experience with mineral exploration projects, and we have relationships with geological consultants and mining companies that specialize in evaluating and developing deposits like what Emma appears to have found." Sarah was struggling to process the implications of what the drilling professionals were telling her about Emma's geological research and the potential value of mineral deposits on their family's property. After months of focusing on immediate survival concerns and dismissing her daughter's rock collecting as an interesting but irrelevant hobby, Sarah was beginning to understand that Emma might have discovered resources that could transform their desperate financial situation into opportunities that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement as professional geological experts validated her research and confirmed that her mineral collecting and historical investigations had identified resources that could be economically significant. The teenager's years of independent research were proving to have been more than just educational hobbies, but systematic investigations that had uncovered geological treasures that had remained hidden beneath their feet throughout 4 generations of successful ranching operations. As the afternoon sun began to set over the Nevada desert, creating the kind of spectacular sunset that made the harsh beauty of their landscape briefly appear magical, Sarah Mitchell was beginning to understand that her family's desperate crisis might be about to become the catalyst for discoveries that would validate Emma's geological passion while providing solutions to problems that had seemed impossible to solve through conventional approaches. The drilling crew's emergency stop at their ranch was evolving from a simple request for assistance into a professional consultation that could lead to partnerships and opportunities that would address both their immediate water needs and their long-term financial security through geological resources that Emma's research had identified and that professional analysis was confirming could have extraordinary economic value. But Sarah Mitchell had no idea that the drilling crew's geological analysis and professional validation of Emma's research was just the beginning of discoveries that would attract the attention of mining companies, geological consultants, and financial partners whose expertise and capital could transform her family's property from a struggling ranch facing foreclosure into one of the most valuable mineral deposits in North America, providing wealth and opportunities that would secure their family's future for generations to come. While Miguel's drilling crew continued their systematic geological analysis of Emma's mineral specimens and the strategic locations where she had made her most significant discoveries, the true magnitude of what lay beneath the Mitchell Ranch remained hidden in historical records that had been forgotten for over 8 decades, buried in the archives of the Nevada State Mining Bureau and the personal papers of geological surveyors whose work had been interrupted by the Great Depression and never resumed. The story of the Mitchell property's extraordinary mineral wealth began in 1889, when the legendary geologist Dr. Clarence Fortescue arrived in central Nevada as part of a comprehensive geological survey commissioned by the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. which was seeking to identify mineral resources along their proposed rail routes that could generate sufficient freight revenue to justify the massive capital investments required for railroad construction through the challenging terrain of the Nevada desert. Dr. Fortescue, who had previously worked on geological surveys that had identified the mineral deposits responsible for Nevada's silver boom in Virginia City, and the gold discoveries that had created boom towns throughout the state during the 1870s and 1880s, brought to central Nevada a level of scientific expertise and advanced geological analysis techniques that far exceeded the capabilities of individual prospectors and small mining companies that had been conducting mineral exploration throughout the region using primitive methods and limited capital resources. The geological survey that Dr. Fortescue conducted during the summer and fall of 1889 covered over 2,000 square miles of central Nevada, including detailed analysis of the valley where Thomas Mitchell would establish his homestead 8 years later, completely unaware that his property selection was positioning his family directly on top of what Dr. Fortescue had identified as potentially the richest extension of Nevada's famous Comstock lode, the legendary silver and gold deposit that had produced over $400 million in precious metals during the late 19th century. Dr. Fortescue's geological analysis of the area that would become the Mitchell Ranch had revealed mineral formations and ore deposits that he described in his confidential report to the Southern Pacific Railroad as geological structures consistent with major precious metal deposits, showing mineral concentrations and formation characteristics that suggest continuity with the Comstock lode system, potentially containing reserves that could exceed the economic value of previously discovered Nevada mining districts. The confidential nature of Dr. Fortescue's report reflected the Southern Pacific Railroad's strategy of identifying valuable mineral resources along their proposed routes while preventing public knowledge that could lead to land speculation and mining claims that would interfere with railroad land acquisition and development plans. The railroad company intended to control mineral extraction rights through their transportation monopoly and land ownership, rather than allowing individual prospectors and small mining companies to benefit from discoveries that had been made using railroad-funded geological expertise. But Dr. Fortescue's geological survey was interrupted by the economic panic of 1893, which forced the Southern Pacific Railroad to suspend their Nevada expansion plans and abandon the comprehensive mineral development strategy that would have led to immediate exploration and extraction of the deposits that Dr. Fortescue had identified beneath what would become the Mitchell family ranch. The geological survey reports were filed in railroad company archives and forgotten as economic priorities shifted toward maintaining existing operations rather than pursuing new development projects in remote areas. The individual prospectors and small mining companies that filed claims throughout the area during the 1890s and early 1900s were working without access to Dr. Fortescue's comprehensive geological analysis using primitive prospecting techniques that could identify surface-level mineral indicators but lacked the scientific knowledge and technical capabilities necessary to understand the true extent and value of the underground deposits that lay beneath their feet. Marcus Goldstein, a German immigrant who had learned mining techniques in the Black Forest region of his homeland, filed the most extensive mining claims on what would become Mitchell property in 1902, establishing the Goldstein Consolidated mining claims that covered 480 acres and included detailed documentation of mineral discoveries that he believed represented significant gold and silver deposits worthy of major investment and large-scale extraction operations. Goldstein's mining operation between 1902 and 1908 was the most sophisticated and well-funded mineral extraction effort ever conducted on the Mitchell property, involving the construction of mining shafts, ore processing equipment and support. Facilities that represented a total investment of approximately $75,000, equivalent to over $5 million in contemporary purchasing power. Goldstein's operation employed 15 workers and utilized steam-powered equipment and chemical processing techniques that were considered advanced for early 20th century mining operations in remote Nevada locations. The geological analysis that Goldstein conducted, using the best available techniques of his era, revealed mineral formations and ore concentrations that convinced him he had discovered an extension of Nevada's major precious metal deposits. But his mining operation was limited by the technological constraints and capital requirements that made deep mining operations financially unsustainable for individual entrepreneurs, operating without the resources of major mining corporations or railroad companies. Goldstein's mining operation successfully extracted approximately $125,000 worth of gold and silver between 1902 and 1908, proving that significant precious metal deposits existed beneath the surface of what would become the Mitchell Ranch. But his operation was terminated not due to depletion of mineral resources, but because of the enormous costs and technical challenges associated with accessing deeper deposits using early 20th century mining technology and the limited capital resources available to individual mining entrepreneurs. The detailed mining records that Goldstein maintained during his 6-year operation documented the locations, depths, and mineral concentrations of his extraction activities, providing a comprehensive map of the precious metal deposits that lay beneath the surface of the Mitchell property. But these records were lost when Goldstein's financial difficulties forced him to abandon his Nevada operations and return to Germany in 1908, taking with him the detailed knowledge of what he had discovered during his years of systematic mining exploration. The mining claims that Goldstein had filed and developed were purchased in 1909 by the Consolidated Nevada Mining Corporation, a subsidiary of the Anaconda Copper Company, which had acquired mining rights throughout central Nevada as part of a comprehensive strategy to control precious metal extraction in the region through vertical integration of mining operations or processing facilities and transportation infrastructure that would allow them to maximize profits from Nevada's mineral resources. The Consolidated Nevada Mining Corporation's geological survey of the former Goldstein claims was conducted by Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a Scottish geologist who had previously worked on major mining projects in South Africa and Australia, bringing to Nevada international expertise in deep mining techniques and ore extraction methods that far exceeded the capabilities of individual prospectors and small mining companies that had previously operated in the area. Dr. Blackwood's geological analysis of the Mitchell property in 1910 confirmed and expanded upon both Dr. Fortescue's earlier survey and Goldstein's mining discoveries, revealing mineral formations and ore deposits that he described in his confidential report to Anaconda Copper as geological structures indicating the presence of one of the largest undeveloped precious metal deposits in North America, with estimated reserves that could potentially exceed $50 million in extractable gold and silver using current mining technology and ore processing methods. The significance of Dr. Blackwood's geological assessment cannot be overstated when placed in historical context. His estimated $50 million in precious metal reserves represented wealth equivalent to over $1.5 billion in contemporary purchasing power, making the deposits beneath the Mitchell property potentially more valuable than many of the famous mining districts that had created enormous fortunes and shaped the economic development of the American West during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But the Consolidated Nevada Mining Corporation's plans for developing the massive precious metal deposits that Dr. Blackwood had identified were disrupted by the complex web of legal disputes, environmental challenges, and economic factors that made large-scale mining operations increasingly difficult and expensive during the period leading up to World War I. Labor disputes, transportation costs, and regulatory requirements were making Nevada mining operations less profitable than international alternatives, leading many American mining companies to focus their investments on foreign projects rather than domestic mineral extraction. The final factor that prevented development of the Mitchell property's precious metal deposits was the discovery in 1912 of massive copper deposits in Montana that offered Anaconda Copper Company opportunities for mineral extraction that were more immediately profitable and less technically challenging than the deep mining operations that would be required to access the gold and silver deposits that Dr. Blackwood had identified beneath the central Nevada desert. Anaconda Copper's decision to abandon their Nevada mining claims in 1913 and focus their resources on Montana copper extraction meant that the detailed geological knowledge and mining development plans for the Mitchell property were filed in corporate archives and forgotten as the company pursued more immediately profitable opportunities in other locations. The mining claims and development rights were sold to a series of smaller companies and individual investors who lacked access to the comprehensive geological analysis that had revealed the true extent and value of the mineral deposits. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 created additional disruptions to Nevada mining operations as labor shortages, equipment priorities, and transportation challenges made civilian mining projects secondary to military production requirements. Many mining operations throughout the American West were suspended or abandoned during the war years, as resources were redirected toward supporting the war effort rather than pursuing civilian economic development projects. Thomas Mitchell's homestead. Filing in 1897 and his subsequent land acquisitions during the early 1900s had positioned his family directly on top of geological treasures that represented some of the most valuable undeveloped mineral deposits in North America. But the combination of economic disruptions, corporate strategic decisions, and historical circumstances had prevented the discovery and development of these resources during the period when major mining companies had the capital and expertise necessary for large-scale mineral extraction operations. The Mitchell family's focus on agricultural development and their philosophical commitment to ranching, rather than mining, had also contributed to the preservation of mineral resources that might have been discovered and extracted if subsequent generations had been interested in mineral exploration or had access to the geological knowledge and mining records that documented the extraordinary wealth that lay beneath their feet. Emma Mitchell's geological research and mineral collecting activities during 2023 and 2024 had unknowingly recreated many of the discoveries that Dr. Fortescue, Marcus Goldstein, and Dr. Blackwood had made during their systematic geological surveys and mining operations between 1889 and 1913, but without access to the historical records and professional geological analysis that would have revealed the full significance of her findings and the extraordinary economic value of the mineral deposits that her independent research had identified. The mineral specimens that Emma had collected from various locations throughout the Mitchell property were actually samples from the same geological formations and ore deposits that had convinced professional geologists and experienced mining companies that their family's ranch contained some of the richest undeveloped precious metal deposits in the American West. But the historical knowledge that would have provided context for understanding the significance of Emma's discoveries had been lost in corporate archives and forgotten historical records. Tommy Henderson's professional geological analysis of Emma's mineral collection was beginning to reveal the same mineral concentrations and geological indicators that had excited Dr. Fortescue, Marcus Goldstein, and Dr. Blackwood during their respective investigations of the Mitchell property. But Tommy's modern geological testing equipment and contemporary analysis techniques were providing even more detailed and accurate assessments of the precious metal deposits than had been possible. Using early 20th century geological survey methods, the handheld geological testing device that Tommy was using to analyze Emma's mineral specimens utilized X-ray fluorescence spectrometry and other advanced techniques that could identify and quantify mineral concentrations with precision that far exceeded anything available to previous generations of geologists and mining engineers who had studied the Mitchell property. Tommy's analysis was revealing gold and silver concentrations in Emma's samples that were significantly higher than what historical mining operations had been able to detect and extract using primitive processing methods. "Emma," Tommy said as he completed his analysis of her most promising mineral specimens, "the gold concentrations that I'm detecting in these samples are extraordinary. We're talking about ore grades that are among the highest I've ever seen in surface collections, suggesting underground deposits that could be economically significant even by contemporary mining standards." Tommy's professional assessment of Emma's mineral collection was confirming that the geological formations on the Mitchell property contained precious metal deposits that were not only economically viable using modern mining techniques, but that represented ore grades and deposit characteristics that would be considered exceptional by current industry standards. The mineral concentrations that Tommy was detecting suggested underground reserves that could potentially be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if properly developed using contemporary mining technology and extraction methods. Carlos Mendoza's systematic mapping of the locations where Emma had found her highest concentration mineral specimens was revealing spatial patterns and geological relationships that suggested the presence of major underground ore bodies rather than random surface mineralization. Carlos's GPS mapping and geological analysis were indicating that Emma's discoveries represented systematic exposure of underground deposits through natural erosion and geological processes rather than isolated mineral occurrences. "Mrs. Mitchell," Carlos said as he reviewed his mapping data, "the spatial distribution of Emma's high-grade mineral finds suggests that we're looking at surface exposure of major underground ore deposits. The geological patterns that we're seeing indicate mineral formations that extend deep underground and cover significant areas of your property." Miguel Rodriguez was beginning to understand that their emergency stop at the Mitchell Ranch had brought them into contact with geological discoveries that were far more significant than anything his drilling company had ever encountered during their years of water well installation and geological analysis throughout Nevada and the southwestern United States. Miguel's experience with mineral-bearing geological formations was giving him insights into the potential economic value of what Emma had discovered and the mining industry relationships that would be necessary for proper evaluation and development of such significant mineral deposits. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said, "what we're finding here suggests mineral deposits that could require major mining company involvement for proper evaluation and development. The ore grades and geological formations that we're identifying are beyond what individual contractors or small companies could handle, but they're exactly the kind of discoveries that major mining corporations spend millions of dollars trying to locate." The drilling crew's professional analysis was revealing that Emma's geological research and mineral collecting had identified resources that represented not just interesting geological curiosities, but potentially one of the most valuable, undeveloped, precious metal deposits in contemporary North America. The combination of Emma's systematic collecting, her historical research into mining claims, and the crew's professional geological testing was painting a picture of mineral wealth that could transform the Mitchell family's financial situation in ways that would exceed anything that 4 generations of successful ranching had ever achieved. Sarah was struggling to comprehend the implications of what the drilling professionals were telling her about Emma's geological discoveries and the potential value of mineral deposits on their family's property. After months of focusing on immediate survival concerns and calculating whether they could raise enough money to prevent foreclosure, Sarah was being confronted with information suggesting that their property might contain resources worth more than everything her family had earned. During 127 years of ranching operations, Emma was practically speechless with excitement as professional geological experts confirmed that her years of independent research and mineral collecting had identified geological treasures that professional mining companies and geologists had been seeking throughout Nevada for over a century. The teenagers' systematic approach to collecting and documenting mineral specimens was proving to have been more scientifically rigorous and economically significant than anyone had imagined possible for amateur geological research. As the late afternoon sun created dramatic shadows across the Nevada landscape, highlighting the rocky hills and abandoned mining sites that dotted the Mitchell property, the drilling crew was completing their geological analysis and beginning to understand that their emergency truck breakdown had brought them to a location where amateur geological research had rediscovered one of the most significant mineral deposits in American mining history. The convergence of Emma's systematic geological research, the drilling crew's professional expertise, and the historical mineral deposits that had remained undeveloped for over a century was creating circumstances that could transform the Mitchell family's desperate financial crisis into an opportunity for wealth and economic security that would exceed their most optimistic dreams, while validating Emma's passion for geological research in ways that would shape her future career and educational opportunities. But the drilling crew's geological analysis was only the beginning of discoveries that would attract the attention of major mining corporations, geological consultants, and financial institutions whose expertise and capital would be necessary for properly evaluating and developing mineral deposits that preliminary analysis suggested could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars and could potentially represent one of the richest undeveloped precious metal discoveries in contemporary North American mining history. The lost geological surveys of Dr. Fortescue and Dr. Blackwood, the abandoned mining operations of Marcus Goldstein, and the forgotten development plans of major mining corporations were about to be validated and exceeded by contemporary analysis that would reveal that the Mitchell family had been living on top of geological treasures that represented not just financial salvation for their immediate crisis, but generational wealth that would secure their family's future while contributing to American mineral production and economic development in ways that would benefit not only their family, but the broader communities and industries that would be involved in developing these extraordinary natural resources. By 5:30 p.m., as the brutal Nevada heat began to subside and the drilling crew's truck had cooled sufficiently for repair work to continue, Miguel Rodriguez made a decision that would change the Mitchell family's life forever and rewrite the history of American mineral discovery. Based on Tommy Henderson's extraordinary geological analysis of Emma's mineral specimens and Carlos Mendoza's systematic mapping of high-grade ore locations throughout the property, Miguel proposed conducting an exploratory drilling test that would definitively determine whether the surface mineral indicators that had so impressed his crew actually represented the kind of major underground deposits that their preliminary analysis suggested. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said as he completed the final repairs on their truck's cooling system, I want to propose something that goes beyond our normal water well drilling services, based on what Tommy and Carlos have discovered through analyzing Emma's geological research. I believe we should conduct exploratory drilling to determine the exact nature and extent of the mineral deposits on your property. My company has the equipment and expertise to drill test cores that would provide definitive answers about what's down there. Miguel explained that exploratory mineral drilling would involve using their specialized drilling equipment to extract core samples from depths of up to 200 feet, providing geological specimens that would reveal the exact mineral concentrations, ore quality, and deposit extent that existed beneath the Mitchell Ranch. The drilling process would take approximately 6 hours and would provide scientific evidence that could be used to attract the attention of major mining companies and geological consultants who specialized in evaluating and developing significant mineral discoveries. The cost for exploratory drilling would normally be $15,000 to $20,000. Miguel continued, but given your family's current financial situation and the assistance you've provided to my crew today, I'm willing to conduct the exploratory drilling at no charge in exchange for the right to be your preferred contractor for any water well drilling or mineral exploration projects that result from what we discover. Sarah looked at Miguel with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, understanding that his proposal represented both an extraordinary opportunity and a commitment to pursuing possibilities that seemed almost too incredible to believe. After months of focusing on immediate survival and dismissing Emma's geological interests as irrelevant hobbies, Sarah was being asked to authorize drilling operations that could either validate her daughter's research in ways that would transform their lives or prove that their hopes were based on amateur misunderstanding of geological processes. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement at the possibility of having professional drilling equipment test the geological theories and mineral discoveries that she had developed through years of independent research and systematic collecting. The teenager understood better than anyone else the significance of what Miguel was proposing, recognizing that core sample drilling would provide definitive answers about the mineral deposits that she had identified through surface exploration and historical research. "Mom," Emma said, her voice reflecting both excitement and scientific curiosity, "this is exactly what we need to determine whether my research has identified something significant or whether I've been misinterpreting what I've found. Professional core drilling will give us actual samples from deep underground, not just surface minerals that could be misleading." Tommy Henderson was enthusiastically supporting Miguel's proposal for exploratory drilling, explaining that the mineral concentrations and geological indicators he had identified through analyzing Emma's collection were extraordinary enough to justify the time and expense of professional geological testing. Tommy's experience with mineral exploration throughout the southwestern United States had convinced him that the Mitchell property represented one of the most promising mineral discovery opportunities he had encountered during his career. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy said, "the mineral samples that Emma has collected show ore grades that are commercially significant by any contemporary mining industry standard. If these surface samples are representative of underground deposits, we could be looking at one of the most valuable mineral discoveries in recent Nevada history." Carlos Mendoza was equally enthusiastic about conducting exploratory drilling, pointing out that the spatial patterns and geological relationships he had mapped through Emma's mineral collection sites suggested systematic underground ore bodies that would be accessible through modern mining techniques and could potentially be developed into profitable extraction operations using contemporary technology and methods. As sunset approached and the Nevada desert landscape was bathed in the spectacular golden light that made the harsh beauty of their environment briefly appear magical, Sarah Mitchell made the decision that, would transform her family's desperate situation into an opportunity that exceeded anything 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers had ever imagined possible. "Miguel," Sarah said, "if you're willing to conduct the exploratory drilling at no cost, and if Emma's research suggests that we might find something significant, then I authorize you to proceed with the drilling. We have nothing to lose, and potentially everything to gain." Miguel's crew immediately began preparing their drilling equipment for mineral exploration rather than water well installation, a process that required different drilling techniques, core sample collection methods, and geological analysis procedures than their typical well drilling operations. The drilling rig was repositioned to the location that Emma and Carlos had identified as showing the highest concentration of surface mineral indicators, approximately 300 yards northeast of the ranch house, in an area where Emma had found her most impressive gold and silver specimens. The exploratory drilling process began at 6:45 p.m. as the Nevada desert temperature dropped to merely 95 degrees Fahrenheit, creating working conditions that were challenging but manageable for the intensive physical labor required for mineral core drilling operations. Miguel operated the drilling equipment while Tommy managed core sample collection, and Carlos documented the geological characteristics of materials that were extracted from increasing depths beneath the Mitchell property. The first 50 feet of drilling revealed geological formations that were consistent with Emma's surface discoveries, showing mineral concentrations and ore characteristics that confirmed the presence of precious metal deposits at depths that had been accessible to early 20th century mining operations. Tommy's analysis of core samples from this depth range revealed gold and silver concentrations that were commercially significant and confirmed that Marcus Goldstein's mining operation between 1902 and 1908 had successfully identified and extracted valuable minerals from legitimate ore deposits. But it was at the 75-foot depth that Miguel's drilling equipment encountered geological formations that exceeded everyone's expectations and confirmed that Emma's amateur research had identified one of the most significant mineral discoveries in contemporary American mining history. The core samples that Tommy extracted from this depth contained gold and silver concentrations that were so extraordinary that he initially questioned the accuracy of his testing equipment and repeated his analysis 3 times to confirm his results. "Miguel, you need to see this," Tommy called out, his voice reflecting amazement at what his geological analysis was revealing. "The ore grades I'm getting from the 75-foot samples are unlike anything I've ever encountered. We're looking at gold concentrations that exceed 2.5 ounces per ton, and silver concentrations that exceed 45 ounces per ton, which are ore grades that would be considered world-class by current mining industry standards." To understand the significance of Tommy's analysis, it's important to recognize that commercial gold mining operations typically consider ore grades of 0.5 ounces per ton to be economically viable, while ore grades exceeding 1.0 ounce per ton are considered high-grade deposits that attract the attention of major mining corporations. The 2.5 ounces per ton that Tommy was detecting in core samples from 75 feet beneath the Mitchell Ranch represented ore grades that were 5 times higher than what most commercial mining operations would consider excellent deposits. Carlos Mendoza was simultaneously analyzing the geological structures and formation characteristics that were revealed through the drilling process, documenting rock formations, mineral distributions, and ore body configurations that would be essential information for evaluating the extent and economic potential of the deposits that were being discovered. Carlos's analysis was revealing that the high-grade ore was not confined to isolated pockets, but appeared to be part of systematic geological formations that extended over significant areas and depths. "Mrs. Mitchell," Carlos said as he reviewed His geological documentation, the core samples are showing that the high-grade ore exists in geological formations that appear to be continuous rather than isolated deposits. The ore body characteristics that we're seeing suggest major underground reserves, rather than small pockets of mineralization. Miguel continued drilling to 100 feet, then 125 feet, then 150 feet, with each depth increment revealing ore grades and geological formations that continued to exceed expectations and confirm that the Mitchell property contained mineral deposits of extraordinary economic significance. The consistency of high-grade ore concentrations at multiple depths was indicating that they had discovered not just promising mineral indicators, but a major ore body that could potentially support large-scale mining operations for decades. At the 150-foot depth, Tommy's analysis of core samples revealed gold concentrations that reached 3.2 ounces per ton, with silver concentrations exceeding 60 ounces per ton, ore grades that were so exceptional that they represented some of the richest mineral deposits ever discovered in Nevada, a state that had been the site of some of the most famous mining discoveries in American history. Emma was watching the drilling process with fascination and growing excitement as each core sample confirmed and exceeded her geological theories about the mineral wealth that lay beneath their family's ranch. The teenagers' years of independent research and systematic mineral collecting were being validated in ways that exceeded her most optimistic expectations, proving that her amateur geological work had identified professional-grade mineral discoveries that would reshape her family's future and her own educational and career opportunities. Sarah was struggling to comprehend the implications of what the drilling crew was discovering beneath their property, recognizing that the ore grades and deposit characteristics that Tommy was documenting represented economic value that could potentially solve not only their immediate financial crisis, but provide generational wealth that would transform their family's economic situation in ways that seemed almost impossible to believe. As darkness fell across the Nevada desert, and Miguel's crew continued drilling by the light of powerful work lamps, the exploratory drilling reached the 175-foot depth where Tommy's geological analysis revealed ore grades that would ultimately be confirmed as among the richest precious metal deposits ever discovered in North America. The core samples from this depth contained gold concentrations of 4.1 ounces per ton and silver concentrations of 78 ounces per ton, ore grades that exceeded the famous Comstock lode deposits that had created enormous fortunes during Nevada's 19th-century mining boom. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy said, his voice reflecting both professional excitement and personal amazement at what his analysis was revealing. "The ore grades we're finding at depth are extraordinary by any standard. We're looking at mineral deposits that could potentially be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if they extend over significant areas of your property." Miguel made the decision to continue drilling to 200 feet to determine whether the high-grade ore continued at greater depths or whether they had reached the limits of the major deposits that Emma's research had identified. The core samples from 200 feet revealed gold concentrations of 3.8 ounces per ton and silver concentrations of 72 ounces per ton, confirming that the ore body extended to depths that would be accessible through modern mining techniques while maintaining ore grades that would justify major mining investments and large-scale extraction operations. Carlos Mendoza's geological analysis of the complete core sample sequence was revealing deposit characteristics and ore body configurations that suggested the Mitchell property contained not just isolated high-grade deposits, but systematic mineral formations that could potentially extend throughout significant portions of their 2,400-acre ranch. The geological structures and mineralization patterns that Carlos was documenting indicated ore reserves that could potentially support mining operations for decades while generating enormous economic returns for the Mitchell family and their development partners. By 11:30 p.m., as Miguel's crew completed their exploratory drilling and began the process of documenting and preserving the core samples that would provide definitive evidence of their extraordinary discoveries, the full magnitude of what Emma's geological research had identified was becoming clear to everyone involved in the drilling operation. Tommy Henderson's comprehensive analysis of core samples from depths ranging from 50 feet to 200 feet had revealed average ore grades of 3.1 ounces of gold per ton and 58 ounces of silver per ton across the entire depth range, ore concentrations that were so consistently high that they indicated major underground ore bodies rather than isolated mineral deposits. Based on conservative estimates of ore body extent and assuming that high-grade mineralization existed throughout even 25% of the Mitchell property, Tommy calculated that their ranch could contain precious metal reserves worth approximately $340 million using current gold and silver market prices. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy said as he completed his preliminary economic analysis, "based on the ore grades we've documented and conservative estimates of deposit extent, your property could contain precious metal reserves worth between $250 million and $450 million, making this potentially one of the most valuable mineral discoveries in contemporary American mining history." Miguel Rodriguez was equally amazed by the results of their exploratory drilling, recognizing that their emergency truck breakdown and chance encounter with the Mitchell family had led to mineral discoveries that would establish his company's reputation as geological consultants while providing opportunities for long-term business relationships with major mining corporations that would be interested in developing such extraordinary deposits. "Mrs. Mitchell," Miguel said, "what we've discovered tonight will attract the attention of every major mining company in North America. The ore grades and deposit characteristics that we've documented represent exactly the kind of discoveries that mining corporations spend millions of dollars trying to locate, and your property appears to contain reserves that exceed most of the famous mining districts that created enormous fortunes during America's mining boom periods." Emma was practically speechless with excitement and validation as professional geological analysis confirmed that her years of independent research had identified one of the most significant mineral discoveries in recent American history. This is UB. Teenagers' systematic approach to geological research and mineral collecting had proven to be more scientifically rigorous and economically valuable than anyone had imagined possible for amateur geological work conducted by a 14-year-old student using library resources and basic collecting techniques. Sarah was beginning to understand that her family's desperate financial crisis was about to be transformed into generational wealth that would provide economic security and opportunities that exceeded anything that 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers had achieved through 127 years of agricultural success. The foreclosure notices and impossible financial mathematics that had consumed her thoughts for months were about to become irrelevant historical curiosities as her family's economic situation was transformed by geological treasures that had been waiting beneath their feet throughout their entire ranching history. But the discovery of extraordinary mineral wealth was only the beginning of transformations that would reshape every aspect of the Mitchell family's life, their relationship to their property and community, and their understanding of their place in the broader story of American mineral development and economic opportunity. Miguel Rodriguez spent the following morning making telephone calls to geological consultants, mining industry contacts, and financial specialists who had the expertise and resources necessary for properly evaluating and developing mineral deposits. Of the significance that had been discovered on the Mitchell property, Miguel's reputation and professional relationships within the mining industry provided him with access to senior executives and technical specialists at major mining corporations who were constantly seeking new deposit opportunities that could justify major investment and development projects. The first mining company representative to visit the Mitchell Ranch was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the chief geologist for Newmont Corporation, one of the world's largest gold mining companies, who arrived 3 days after Miguel's exploratory drilling. With a team of specialists and advanced geological testing equipment that would provide independent confirmation of the extraordinary ore grades and deposit characteristics that Miguel's crew had documented. Dr. Walsh's team conducted comprehensive geological surveys, additional core drilling, and sophisticated chemical analysis that not only confirmed Miguel's findings, but revealed that the mineral deposits were even more extensive and valuable than preliminary analysis had suggested. Dr. Walsh's analysis indicated that high-grade ore extended throughout approximately 40% of the Mitchell property, suggesting total precious metal reserves that could potentially exceed $500 million value. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Walsh said, after completing 3 days of intensive geological analysis, your property contains mineral deposits that rank among the most valuable, undeveloped precious metal discoveries in North America. Newmont Corporation would be very interested in negotiating a development partnership that would provide your family with substantial immediate compensation and ongoing royalty payments that could generate income for generations. The partnership proposal that Dr. Walsh presented to Sarah and Emma included immediate compensation of $25 million for mineral development rights, followed by royalty payments of 12% of all precious metals extracted from their property, with guaranteed minimum annual payments of $15 million regardless of mining production levels. The financial terms of Newmont's proposal would not only solve the Mitchell family's immediate financial crisis, but provide economic security that would exceed anything that ranching operations could have generated during multiple centuries of agricultural success. But Dr. Walsh's proposal was only the first of multiple offers that the Mitchell family would receive from major mining corporations, geological consulting firms, and financial institutions that recognized the extraordinary economic potential of the mineral deposits that Emma's research and Miguel's drilling had discovered. Within 2 weeks of the initial discovery, Sarah was receiving partnership proposals from 6 different mining companies, each offering financial terms that would transform her family into one of the wealthiest landowners in the American West. Media attention that accompanied the discovery of such significant mineral deposits brought national and international recognition to the Mitchell family's story, highlighting both their previous financial struggles and the extraordinary geological discoveries that had transformed their economic situation. Emma's role in identifying the mineral deposits through independent geological research made her a celebrity among earth science educators and mining industry professionals who were amazed that amateur geological work had succeeded in discovering resources that professional exploration had missed for over a century. The Discovery Channel produced a documentary about the Mitchell family's story, focusing on the combination of desperate financial circumstances, family cooperation, and scientific curiosity that had led to one of the most significant mineral discoveries in recent American history. Emma's geological research and Miguel's professional drilling expertise were featured as examples of how individual determination and professional competence could combine to create opportunities that exceeded everyone's expectations. 6 months after Miguel's exploratory drilling had confirmed the presence of extraordinary mineral deposits, Sarah Mitchell signed a comprehensive development partnership with Newmont Corporation that provided her family with immediate compensation of $35 million and guaranteed annual royalty payments that would provide economic security for multiple generations while preserving their ownership of the ranch and their ability to continue living on the property that had been their family's home for 127 years. The mining operation that Newmont established on the Mitchell property became one of the most productive precious metal extraction facilities in contemporary American mining, generating over $150 million in gold and silver production during its first 2 years of operation, while providing employment for over 300 people and contributing significantly to the economic development of rural Nevada communities that had been struggling with declining agricultural and ranching employment. Emma Mitchell's role in discovering the mineral deposits led to scholarship offers from universities throughout the United States, including full academic scholarships to study geological engineering at the Colorado School of Mines, Stanford University, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Emma's choice to attend the Colorado School of Mines while maintaining her residence on the family ranch allowed her to pursue advanced geological education while continuing her involvement in the mining operations that her research had made possible. Sarah Mitchell's transformation from struggling single mother facing foreclosure to wealthy landowner and mining partner represented one of the most dramatic economic reversals in recent American history. But Sarah's response to her family's changed circumstances reflected the values and perspectives that had shaped 4 generations of Mitchell ranchers who had understood that wealth and opportunity carried responsibilities to family, community, and future generations. The Mitchell Family Foundation, which Sarah established using a portion of their mining royalties, provides scholarships for rural students interested in pursuing geological and engineering education, supports environmental research related to sustainable mining practices, and funds economic development programs for rural communities throughout the American West that are facing challenges similar to those that had threatened the Mitchell family's survival. 3 years after Miguel Rodriguez's emergency truck breakdown had led to the discovery of extraordinary mineral wealth beneath the Mitchell Ranch, Sarah and Emma were recognized at the White House during a ceremony honoring American families whose determination and innovation had contributed to national economic development and resource independence. President Biden's remarks during the ceremony highlighted the Mitchell family's story as an example of how individual initiative, family cooperation, and scientific curiosity could create opportunities that benefited not only individual families, but entire communities and industries. Emma Mitchell, now 17 years old and completing her junior year at the Colorado School of Mines, while maintaining her residence on the family ranch, had become one of the youngest consulting geologists in American mining history, providing expertise to mining companies and geological surveys throughout North America while continuing her academic studies and research into mineral exploration techniques and sustainable extraction methods. Sarah Mitchell's ranch operation had been transformed from a struggling cattle operation facing foreclosure into a model of sustainable agriculture that was supported by mining royalties while demonstrating how mineral development and agricultural activities could coexist through careful planning and environmental stewardship. The Mitchell Ranch had become a case study for universities and government agencies that were developing policies and practices for integrating mineral extraction with other forms of rural land use. The story of the Mitchell family's transformation, from desperate financial crisis to extraordinary wealth and opportunity, became legendary throughout Nevada and the American West, inspiring other rural families to explore the geological potential of their properties, while demonstrating how amateur scientific research, professional expertise, and fortunate circumstances could combine to create life-changing discoveries. that exceeded everyone's expectations. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the Mitchell family's story was the validation it provided for the values of hospitality, determination, and curiosity that had shaped their response to both crisis and opportunity. Sarah's decision to help Miguel's stranded drilling crew, despite her own desperate circumstances, had created the conditions that led to their family's transformation, while Emma's scientific curiosity and systematic research had provided the knowledge necessary for recognizing and developing the extraordinary geological resources that had been waiting beneath their feet for over a century. Today, the Mitchell Ranch continues to operate as both a successful mining property and a working cattle ranch, demonstrating that economic development and traditional rural lifestyles can coexist through thoughtful planning and commitment to values that prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term exploitation. The Mitchell family story serves as inspiration for anyone facing seemingly impossible circumstances, proving that individual acts of kindness, determination, and curiosity can create opportunities that transform not only personal situations, but contribute to broader economic development and community prosperity. The legacy of Emma Mitchell's geological research and the mining discoveries that resulted from her systematic investigation of their family's property continues to influence geological education and mineral exploration techniques throughout the United States. While the Mitchell family's commitment to using their wealth for supporting education, environmental research, and rural economic development provides a model for how extraordinary good fortune can be transformed into opportunities that benefit entire communities and future generations. In the end, the story of how a single mother's well ran dry and led to the discovery of one of North America's richest gold mines proves that sometimes our greatest challenges create the circumstances that lead to our most extraordinary opportunities, and that the combination of human kindness, scientific curiosity, and professional expertise can unlock treasures that exceed our most optimistic dreams while creating legacies that benefit not only our own families, but contribute to the broader story of American determination, innovation, and prosperity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.